Hi, everyone. It's Margaret Manning here with lifeafterdeath.com. Lifeafterdeath.com is a community of people who are fascinated by the topic of life after death, interested in near-death experience, afterlife, and spirituality in general. Now, we bring on guests to the show here to talk about their own experience and to enlighten us about what their view of these topics is. And my guest today is Dr. Eben Alexander. Dr. Alexander is a neurosurgeon. He has been working with patients for many years, a man of science. He knows all about the brain and how it can be damaged, and that was his experience until 2008 when he had a personal experience with near-death experience. He had a very serious brain, a very unusual meningitis that came very suddenly, and he was in a coma for 7 days. And when he came back, his brain was completely healed, and he has gone on to tell the story of this journey. So, Dr. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Well, hello, Margaret. It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to chat with you. We've already had one conversation about that near-death experience, and people can view that if they want to get the whole story of what you saw and what you experienced. But I wanted to chat with you about the next sort of level of understanding about this and how we go a little deeper with this whole idea of near-death experience. Many people go through them. You discovered this when you came out of your coma, that your experience was not unusual. But tell us a bit about how it changed your life and how you think, it can be a healing experience to have gone through that near-death experience.
I would say it's always a healing experience, but
Okay.
it can take us a while. It can take the rest of our life to try and incorporate it all and assimilate it all. My experience was really a perfect gift because the meningitis I had was so severe, as mentioned in that case report that I talked about in our earlier interview.
Yes.
That it really should have killed me and should not have allowed for any kind of robust conscious experience. In fact, my doctors, by the end of that week in coma, estimated I was down to a 2% chance of survival with no chance of recovery. That's the part that was so shocking. Now, when I first came back to this world on that 7th day of coma, Sunday morning, my brain was wrecked. I didn't just kind of wake up and come back to normal. I didn't even recognize my mother, my sons, my sisters standing at the bedside. All I knew was where I had just been, this extraordinary journey. And those memories are as sharp and crisp and alive today as if it all happened yesterday morning. I mean, it's really kind of shocking how resilient those memories are. And that to me was a huge part of the lesson, because all I remembered when I came back to this world was where I'd been during that coma journey. I remembered nothing of my previous life memories. They took about 8 weeks to return in full.
Really?
The other thing that was shocking about it was based on conversations with close family and friends about specific topics, I came to realize, in comparison to similar conversations before the coma, that after those 2 months of memory return, my memories were more complete than they had been before. It was a perfect example of how memories are not stored in the physical brain. And this is something that's in detail in living in a mindful universe.
So what happened to your brain? I mean, what happened?
I would say essentially my neocortex, the most powerful calculator in the human brain, the part that modern neuroscience says at least some part of which must be responsible for any kind of detailed conscious awareness, my entire neocortex was demonstrably very, very damaged. My CT and MRI scan showed full thickness damage in all 8 lobes of my brain. So it was a very bad case of meningitis. It should have killed me, and certainly have not allowed the kind of recovery I had. But as we mentioned earlier, NDEs, placebo effect, these are all indicators of mind over matter. And that's what this revolution in scientific understanding is getting to, is finally trying to make sense of quantum physics in a way that we can all kind of interpret. And what that really means is that consciousness is fundamental. The brain is a filter that allows consciousness in, but it doesn't create it de novo. And in fact, when our brain and body die, it's the equivalent of being released from prison. So our conscious awareness, as opposed to disappearing, which is what the materialist scientist in me would have predicted from my meningitis, we actually have the opposite occur. And that's what near-death experiencers have been trying to tell us for thousands of years, that the brain is a prison, it's shackles, and it's released from that. But the good news is through meditation, sacred acoustics is a very powerful tool. And through using that kind of meditation or whatever form of centering prayer or deep meditation you can come up with, but it's basically acknowledging that the little voice in our head, the voice of the ego, is not who we are. And that's a crucial point to get. And that's where, when Karen and I do these meditation workshops, we invite people to develop a much richer relationship with that higher soul, with that primordial mind. When you realize that your consciousness is not created within your brain and not some private little province stuck between your ears somewhere, but in fact, by going into consciousness, you're going out into the universe. That's where we truly start to awaken our free will and the power of true healing. That's what happens.
So where is this consciousness then? Is it that the consciousness is everywhere and we have a little channel to it, which is our consciousness? What makes our consciousness distinctly ours as opposed to the cosmic consciousness?
Well, the thing is,
that makes sense.
It's never really ours. We are just kind of renting consciousness. We are sharing the dream of the one mind. That's what all this evidence in modern parapsychological and psychological work showing the reality of telepathy, precognition, presentiment, psychokinesis, distant healing, things like that, can all be demonstrated in a scientific fashion. And that's where I think the real action is. And that's where this world is waking up. But the important thing is what the world will see is a coming together of science and spirituality, because the old materialist model that somehow this universe is a cold, chaotic machine that's running, with no purpose and no meaning at all, which is kind of a hallmark of the materialist worldview, is false. And I think so many people suspect this. There's so many seekers who have sensed there's far more to this than what the bleak, paltry fiction offered up by materialist science. And that's where consciousness studies are headed now. And the good news is nobody has to wait for the scientific community to fully catch up on this. The science already supports it tremendously. So the ground is open to the individual seeker to explore and come back with their own answers about this nature of connection with the universe, the purpose we're here. And I think that the whole purpose for evolution today, and has been for thousands of years, is for humanity to finally learn this lesson of connectedness, that we're all connected with the rest of this universe, and that connection is a binding force of love and kindness and compassion. And that is all written into the fabric of the universe as revealed by the modern neuroscience of consciousness.
So is it really consciousness over matter rather than mind over matter? It sounds like mind is actually bounded by the body.
Well, no, not at all. In fact, I would say the mind is probably our best example of how we are not at all bound by the body. That's why I'm talking about.
So it's the brain then. Okay.
And all these precognition, everything I've mentioned about non-local consciousness, that is what's showing us that our mind is not restricted to our brain. Our mind is not even created by the brain. It's only filtered in by the brain. But consciousness is primordial. It's the thing that exists. It's just showing us that there's a top-down ordering of causality, which quantum physicists are well aware of. If you look at the writings of George F.R. Ellis from South Africa, a mathematician who's written about top-down causality as applied to quantum physics for years. And this is where the truth lies. And this is where quantum physics is inevitably leading us into this uncharted territory where mind is fundamental in the universe. The science support this dramatically, and that's where the world will shift, all for the better.
So you discovered after you came through your own experience, you discovered that there were many, many people who had shared the similar, experiences as well. And in fact, when you mentioned to someone, they always say, "Well, I had a similar experience." So all those people reported various, similarities. But one that you talked about, which I think you mentioned is a healing element of a near-death experience, is this life review that you tend to that many people go through. Can you talk about what you learned in that experience that you had?
It's important to point out that my amnesia, the fact that I remembered absolutely nothing of Eben Alexander's life, no religious beliefs, no words or language, none of it was left, and no personal memories. And that amnesia was very important in helping to glean these various lessons about memory and experience, consciousness. And so I'm sorry, you're getting back to your question was the...
No, it was just that what you mentioned earlier that a life review when you're in that near-death experience. I mean, how it can be actually, some people might say a near-death experience would be a scary thing, but in many ways it's a very positive thing, and it gives you...
Well, I think when you talk to people who've had near-death experiences, you realize they're, in general, not frightening. About 3 or 4% of them have frightening elements. Well, so did mine. My earthworm eye view was kind of a frightening element. But I saw in my journey, in my coma journey, I saw reincarnation. I saw this beautiful kind of tapestry was one way it was presented to me, with all these interwoven threads showing that sentient beings spend time, in this material world. This is where we actually get the work done. This is the school of our souls. But we do it kind of partially blinded. We don't have the kind of full knowing of our higher soul, which we can glean through meditation and centering prayer. We can get back in touch with that. But many of us don't experience it until we have that life review, when we die and leave this world. And the life review, which occurs in about 25% of all near-death experiences, is a major kind of course correction mechanism. It's where we find out that we are not really the self we thought we were, because the life review, when you talk to hundreds of people who have had them, is more just a reflection of how you experience that as those who were impacted by your actions and thoughts, not as yourself. That's the important point. So the life review is a beautiful demonstration of how the one mind is going through this beautiful dream with these apparent facets on the diamond, our separate perspectives. But we're really all working towards evolution of consciousness itself. And it's not just a human phenomenon. It turns out humans can discuss this, and we bring it back at some, quote, human level. But when you cross the boundary and get into those spiritual realms, there's no such thing as limiting to the human level. And so we are really free to explore and learn a tremendous amount. But then, of course, we come back to this world, and we're very limited by being stuck in our body and this apparent here and now and sense of self. And we don't even really have a language to discuss these experiences. But as Karen and I have discovered in our workshops, people don't need a near-death experience to fully come to know the truth of eternity of soul, the reality of reincarnation, which has been scientifically validated very strongly over more than 6 decades of work at the University of Virginia, originally by Dr. Ian Stevenson, more recently by Dr. Jim Tucker, where they have more than 2,700 cases of past life memories in children.
Wow.
The explanation is actually of reincarnation.
Wow.
So in other words, when you recognize the validity of all this, it simply means we need a much bigger theater of operations to try and explain consciousness and the relationship of mind and brain.
How do you see this evolving? How do you see this evolving into the next 20 years, in a world that's super chaotic, super polarized? There's a negativity in belief systems, opposition. How do you see this potentially changing the world?
Well, it's really changing through more and more people going within. I think that meditation and centering prayer are crucial pathways towards manifesting the reality of kind of the free will of our higher soul and the world of our dreams. And it's really important for people to pay attention to that. Now, the other thing is the neuroscience of consciousness is going to be the foundation on which so much of this is built. The neuroscience of consciousness is a giant and very kind of still mystifying entity, and yet it's essential. We cannot understand any more about humanity and our existence in this universe unless we can much more clearly define this thing we call conscious awareness and what it is, and what our relationship of our will and our sense of having a free will to make choices in this world, how that is actually connected to our being able to manifest those choices. And I think that with a combination of the science and with people going within and discovering for themselves, this whole world will shift dramatically. Because as you come to acknowledge the scientific knowledge that supports reincarnation, of the afterlife, telepathy, the primacy of consciousness, every bit of that, it is very liberating for individual human souls who are trying to make a difference in this world and trying to basically bring the goodness in their heart and their heart consciousness into focus to help fellow beings, because one cannot go into these spiritual realms without coming away with a deep sense that we're all interconnected, and that binding force is really one of love, compassion, mercy, and forgiveness. And those are the prime ingredients, combined with gratitude, that enable us to fully embrace this beautiful mystery that we call life.
I love that quote by Ram Dass where he says, we're just here on this planet to be walking each other home. And I it's like when we realize that eventually, maybe we'll reach some of the point. What's so exciting to me, Dr. Alexander, is you're sitting here. If I didn't know you were a doctor, if I didn't know you had been through all the training, become a neurosurgeon, I would say you were a spiritual man, had a very beautiful near-death experience, but you are a scientist. I mean, you are one of the people now, I imagine, on the forefront of this type of connecting, science and spirituality. And I would people check out your website. It's ebenalexander.com. You've got 3 books, right? You've got the book that you wrote after your experience of near-death experience, which is Proof of Heaven. And then you wrote a book where you brought people together to share their stories. But I think the one that's really exciting is the 3rd one you did with Karen Newell, which is this Living in a Mindful Universe, which is more practical stuff, how you can get there in the way.
And also that is the book that is most ambitious in bringing together science and spirituality. It goes a long way towards doing that, which is an ambitious thing to do at this stage in the game. And yet, I think that only by really coming up with a much more suitable worldview can we possibly start to explain all this. We've had centuries of trying to put Band-Aids on a broken worldview, and that's never really gotten us very far. So it's high time that we really kind of shifted completely and realized that with just some minor adjustments in our fundamental worldview about the nature of reality, we can start explaining a whole lot more things and also gaining tremendous influence on how to change this world for the better.
Well,
so awakening is long overdue.
Well, I think just changing the language is important, and science is going to help us with that, because I think science is now becoming more acceptable. I mean, we are sort of evolving that way, that what we see and what we can evidential, proof, but science is changing the conversation, and that's where you're doing such an amazing job. So thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I will say that it was a giant relief when I finally figured out about 2 years after my coma that there are literally hundreds of scientists around this world who are hot on this trail, have been for decades, and are actually making tremendous progress. And I'm glad that I can help to assist in that effort because it will make this world a far better place than this crazy, confused, polarized, and very misguided, egocentric world that we live in. We're really all here to help each other. And there's no better way to manifest the love of the universe for ourselves than to serve as a conduit for that love for all fellow beings. So I can just, I'm very ecstatic about the scientific aspects of this revolution and know how much good it's going to bring to hundreds of millions of souls yet to be born.
I love your passion. I love your honesty. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to share with our community what you went through and your hopes for the future. Thank you so, so much. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our Life After Death YouTube channel and visit our website at lifeafterdeath.com. We are a community of people who are fascinated by the topic of life after death and subjects like near-death experience, the afterlife, reincarnation, and spirituality. Together, we are exploring and discovering these topics together with curiosity and an open heart.